threats against election workers across the country. The FBI is investigating a series of letters containing suspicious powder sent to election workers in at least these 5 states. One even tested positive for traces of fentanyl. Election officials are calling this an act of domestic terrorism. Joining us now is NBC's Justice and Intel correspondent Ken Delanian and former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Frank Figliuzzi. Ken, what more have we learned about these letters and which states received them?
Good morning. We may be up to, Washington State, Oregon, Texas, Georgia, California, Nevada at this point have all reported receiving these letters targeted at election offices or election workers. The FBI and the Postal Inspection Service are investigating. A copy of one letter that is circulating around suggests that whoever sent it wanted to stop the election process, which is fairly self-evident. As you mentioned, Secretary of States, including Brad Raffensperger of Georgia, have come out forcefully and declared that this is domestic terrorism, that it can't be tolerated. In a number of instances, white powder included in these envelopes has tested positive for fentanyl, which is obviously a really toxic substance, but there have been no reports of anyone hurt or injured or suffering ill health effects from contact with the letters. Nonetheless, it's a really alarming development for a group of election workers who are already under a heightened state of threat amid bogus claims of fraud and a lot of angst in the land about elections on it.
And Frank, Fulton County, Georgia, where of course there's the election interference probe and the trial set to be, this was one of the targets reportedly. Georgia's Secretary of State Raffensperger said this yesterday.
I just want to really emphasize the seriousness of this. You know, some people like to call fentanyl a drug, but it's actually poison. It'll kill you. It'll kill you very quickly, very easily, and it's very dangerous. This is domestic terrorism, and it needs to be condemned by anyone that holds elected office and anyone that wants to hold elected office anywhere in America.
So, Frank, we heard him calling this domestic terrorism. Is that what this is?
Yeah, look, the working definition of domestic terrorism is the use or threatened use of force to influence or coerce a government or a civilian population for a particular ideology or political cause. So if indeed this is about delaying the counting of votes or delaying an election, it certainly would fit the definition of domestic terrorism. And I echo the sentiments of the Secretary of State of Georgia on how lethal this could be. Now, skin exposure to fentanyl is less likely to be lethal, but inhaling fentanyl can be extremely harmful and lead to death. Even as much as 10 to 15 grains, the equivalent of 10 to 15 grains of salt could be a lethal.
What did he say?
As much as 10 to 15 grains, the equivalent of 10 to 15 grains of salt could be a lethal dose. So something to be concerned about. It looks like this is about intimidating election workers. It's also a message about law enforcement's ability to stop and intercept some of these letters. Georgia, reportedly, their letter was intercepted in the system before it actually arrived to the election office.
But it appears these letters were going far and wide and no arrests that we know of, at least at this point. What are investigators doing right now, Frank?
Yeah, there's an interesting a similar incident that occurred in August in Washington State. Again, an election office receiving a trace amount of fentanyl in the mail, and reportedly that letter originated in the state of Oregon. So we already have enough for law enforcement to be going on here. Postal inspectors, FBI, very adept at tracing mailings. So I'm encouraged by the fact that this person or persons will be found, but there's also a safety message here. So if you're in an election office, you should be doing what many corporations have moved to, which is think about how you're handling your mail. Think about using gloves. Think about using a bio box to open your mail. Screen your mail. Wear a mask so you don't inhale a toxic substance that...
You know, living in the 21st century and today towards Bible prophecy coming true in living in perilous times that the Bible says that we will be living in. I have never seen so many vulnerabilities in different areas that the public is vulnerable in towards people causing havoc or harm or even death and injury in people's lives. You know, I myself check a lot of the things now whenever I buy. Um, at the grocery store, making sure that the ice cream looks to be the seal on it looks to be sealed. Um, making sure that my produce hadn't been tampered with, etc., etc. Um, there's all kinds of pitfalls and dangers out there that we as a society have had to become adjusted to, and this is just going to be another add-on to the lunatics that's out there that wants to create harm and havoc and hurt in the people's lives. So you can't tell me that Satan is not coming down in great wrath, just as the Bible talks about, bringing destruction to humanity, because its time is short. There's no really there's no other motive, reasonable explanation for all these occurrences that continue to keep happening to not just the people in America but all over the world, other than evil rising up, just as the Bible talks about in the last days, wreaking havoc upon a society because this evil entity knows its time is short. There's really no other categorizing things. There's really no other category to put it in other than it being motivated by evil, bringing destruction or self-destruction to humanity. And to think that we live in a society today with all that going on in the Middle East, and with so many people, so many different countries having nuclear bombs, to think that we live in a society that a great deal of people out there could care less about life, much less about death. It is absolutely a very, very intimidating, horrifying, dehumanizing thought in thinking that any individual could walk out or go to the post office and get their mail or have it delivered to them and open it up, and it could actually cost them their very life. If this great nation does not hurry up and awaken pertaining to this spiritual bombardment that we're under, this invasion that we're under, I don't know that we're going to be able to survive through even part of the 21st century, much less all the 21st century. Matter of fact, I'm in doubt that we're going to survive the whole 21st century as the world that we know it of today. As the world that we know it as of today. And I know whenever I say that, the majority of the decent people out there are going to say, well, gee, you mean to say the world's going to end? Well, yeah, it's predicted for it to end. But I'm talking about the world that we used to know of, it being kind, decent, polite, orderly, where you could put trust in people, etc. I'm talking about that world has already done crumbled to the point that now we're living in a very distorted, worried, displacent, harsh, cruel, insensitive, evil world that's only becoming more and more eviler every day. Every day, something on the news happens that is a little bigger, that tops out the stuff that went on yesterday or the day before yesterday, just growing and manifesting itself in such of a degree that if our professional world and if our spiritual leaders cannot identify this, then something is horribly, horribly wrong with their logic. I personally have reached a level of uncertainty in being able to reverse all this. And to be quite honest with you, I know for a fact, if we was just dependent upon to our own faculties, of our own strengths, of our own abilities, to be able to reverse all this, it would be impossible. It would be impossible to reverse the madness that's going on right now, regardless whether it's coming through the form of post office, fentanyl, poisoning, and that's exactly what it is. It's poison. Especially if you do too much. They're talking about 10 to 15 grains of salt, 10 to 15 grains of salt, that's almost 10 to 15 grains of salt would probably be.
So much, Frank Figluzzi, Ken Delaney, and keep us posted as we get new information.
If you was to take a regular eraser on a number 2 pencil, you could probably fill the cap. Let's say you had a cap the size of an eraser. You could probably fill that cap up 10 times with 10 to 15 grains of sand to give you any kind of idea towards the lethalness of this poison.
To stop that from happening.
I mean, that's pretty bad. And to think that it ain't so bad if you just get it on your skin, but to think that if you inhale it, breathing it, that it could basically cost you your life. And a lot of these police officers now, because
I don't think the Lord Jesus himself could manage this group, adding that he would pray for the new House Speaker. Another lawmaker I talked to, Congressman Thomas Massey, said that the honeymoon period for Speaker Johnson could be coming to an end sooner than they thought, in part because we are in the same place as Kevin McCarthy, the ousted Speaker, was in just...
See what I'm saying? We're just going through one horrible event after another. And wow, to think that small of an amount of fentanyl that can cause first responders, police officers, or whatever, detectives, investigators, whatever, to cause them to be at harm because they pull somebody over and they got it in their vehicle or it's in their home. We're living in times right now that in the fondest imagination, wildest dreams, 35, 40 years ago, could have never, ever began to believe that we would be dealing with all these issues. But we are.
Looking back to the last time the government shut down, which was in 2019, at the time, 300,000 federal employees were furloughed. For what it's worth, the government lost about $11 billion, $3 billion of which was lost permanently, according to the CBO. But here's the thing. Julie mentioned that the shutdown vibes are low, and even if they do pass a short-term measure, if it's not a full-year deal to fund the government, there could still be implications as well. Let me explain. That's because under the debt limit agreement earlier this year, there was a provision and a side deal that says, well, if they can't get a full year funding agreement done by the end of this year, they can put into place an automatic 1% change to discretionary funding here. So essentially, what would that mean? It's 1% of that 26% of our overall federal spending. The 66%, which covers Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, would not be touched. What would be touched? Things like this. We're looking at things like, for example, transportation, as well as health, education, non-defense discretionary spending, which is about 55% of discretionary spending. Could that also impact defense, which is 45% of discretionary spending? A lot of that is going to depend on the terms of this deal, which is the reason why I don't want...
See, we're already walking backwards. We're already crawfishing pertaining to this indebtedness that various politicians and professional people has got us into. We're already starting to compromise, and next year we'll even compromise more, and the next year we'll compromise even more, to the extent that eventually it will affect Social Security, it will affect hospitalization and health care, it will affect people's lives, not in an indirect way, but in a direct way, if we do not grab a hold of this problem before it grabs a hold of us. And in lots of ways it already has, because there's so many different areas out there that's been lacking. And I'm just going to throw this one out there real quick pertaining to our infrastructure that's been lacking. I mean, you can get on the internet and you can look where several bridge collapsings has happened this year, other than the one up in Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania or wherever it was. You can see where the infrastructure in our country is basically coming apart at the seams. So if that's being compromised on, pertaining to lack of labor or lack of financial funds to fund the labor, what inevitably is going to be next that we have to take away from? I mean, there's a lot of talk right now pertaining to walking away from the Internal Revenue services that somebody's put a pencil to just the other day that I seen on the news, to where it was actually going to cost the government more money by trimming the labor force out of Internal Revenue Service than it would be to trim the labors from the services. There's so many times that these Internal Revenue Services strictly rely upon the everyday old Joe rather than attack the big conglomerates, because there's too much paperwork, too much time, and it's more involved in going after a conglomerate like a company or whatever than it is to go after an individual person. Once more, they're losing something like 20-25% of the revenue that should be going to the federal government in that agency department because of them not properly doing their jobs. So if you was to take that many more people out of the Internal Revenue Service equation, that would be that much more loss that it would cost the agency rather than it helping the agency. And that's just one analogy that I've heard of that the government is having to compromise on.
Have to watch very closely developments coming out of Capitol Hill.
Yeah, that's a lot of categories: healthcare, education, veterans that could be impacted. Brian Chung, thank
Sure
you.
it is.
Julie Sirkin, as always, appreciate you. Turning now to news that really set off a political earthquake from West Virginia to Washington, D.C. Senator Joe Manchin making the surprise announcement that he will not seek re-election in 2024 and hinting at a potential run for the White House.
What I will be doing is traveling the country and speaking out to see if there is an interest in creating a movement to mobilize the middle and bring Americans together.
Joining us now, former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent and former Democratic Congressman Steve Israel. Good to see you, gentlemen. Happy Friday. So, Congressman Dent, what went through your mind first when you saw this news break about Manchin?
Well, I thought Joe Manchin did a great service to this country. He was one of the too few people in the United States Congress trying to keep the Senate together. He has repeatedly done things to try to help, say, take the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He was among the key leaders on that proposal. I mean, he's just been at the center of all these fights, and I applaud him. And he's a rare breed. He was defying political gravity all these years. Winning in West Virginia State, I think Trump won by about 40 points. And Joe Manchin somehow would win. Those days are gone. We're not going to see many members be able to do what he did. Win in districts or states where the party is dominant.
Okay, so he won the district. Okay, that's cool. But what in essence, what actually has happened to the people in Virginia and West Virginia, and in other areas of the East Coast areas? They have basically lost their shirts because of the coal mining industry that Ronald Reagan put in place that basically literally killed communities and towns. And Wheeling, West Virginia was one of them. Wheeling, West Virginia, I have visited since my occurrence happened in the early 90s with Homeland Security, with a federal judge and a bogus appointed public defender and a cruel, insensitive 911 dispatcher. I've been back to Wheeling, West Virginia. Matter of fact, I went through their library records to look at their what they call it at that time. They didn't have digital stuff at that time. Where you take it out and you look at it, just a little like clear piece of whatever.
The country needs it desperately.
Anyways, I've looked through their files and seen where, yes, I was in their catalog pertaining to what went on. So, they can talk all the talk pertaining to how that they've won this particular region or that particular region. But what's happened to the people in that area? What's happened to the people in America? They went downhill.
Also defending seats in 5 states. Biden narrowly won. Of course, West Virginia is such a red state, which has always made, Joe Manchin sort of this unicorn, a Democrat winning a Senate seat there. So how hard does, his removal from the equation make the Senate math for Democrats?
Well, Anna, thanks for having me on. First, a disclosure, I'm a friend of Joe Manchin. We work together very closely on development of anti-ballistic missile capabilities against North Korea. I have a ton of respect for him. To answer your question specifically, Anna, look, it is undeniable that this is a setback for Democrats' efforts to retain a 51-seat majority, but it is not a bulwark against those efforts. Joe Manchin is the only Democrat who could have won West Virginia. That state now, in my view, comes out of play. But Democrats are making a very strong argument that they can contest effectively. They're on offense in Texas against Ted Cruz with my former colleague and Charlie's former colleague Colin Allred, former quarterback. They believe that they can go on offense in Florida. And so I think we're going to see a fluctuating political landscape in the Senate, and it's way too early, even with Joe's decision not to run for the Senate.
You know, they keep wanting to try to normalize things in this political system over here in America. And by far, is it even close of being normal? Everything about this is totally, totally in left field, and it's very, very uncommon and abnormal in what's going on and in how that it's going on. And they put all these smoke screens up, hoping that people's memories aren't going to be that long, kind of like me putting out a statement today in regards towards Veterans Day coming up. How can people that are true patriots of this great nation, how can they truly support Donald Trump whenever he degraded, basically demoralized the family of John McCain out in Arizona? And the thing about it is, whenever you demoralize one, regardless whether it's POW or MIA, you've demoralized all of them. And to think that this guy is going to run for president again after him get through showing his you know what the way that he did with the people out in Arizona, it's a disgrace. And in some ways, I truly believe that Donald Trump is actually unfit to run for president. Now, this guy here that they're talking about, I don't know nothing about him, but all it's going to do is throw another cog in the wheel, in the mechanics of misfortunes and complex things even that much more worser, rather than it being a solution to the problem. In essence, it's actually going to be that much more of a problem, which is going to be that much more of a distraction. And if it's that much more of a distraction, that means there's going to be people that are not going to be focused on the right thing. And I guess these politicians are really, really praying and hoping that people like us,
joining us now, NBC's Josh Letterman.
Just to comment on Joe, they're hoping that people like us, that our memory isn't basically as long as our shoe size. And what they don't understand is Google and social media is now fighting against their scams. And it is a scam in how that they have went in and manipulated the goodwill of the people in America. Because now, if you even remotely think about, oh, what did that person say? Now all you got to do is tell Google, look this up. Look up what this president said about this particular thing. Or look up what politician said this about that. And yes, guess what? Google's got a memory about 1,000 trillion billion times more smarter than ours pertaining to remembering things. And Google can put you right on it, especially if it's ever been viewed digitally online, that's been recorded. You can find it, post it, put it out there. That way you can build your case that much more stronger off of it. And that's what I've been basically doing, in addition to talking in behind the camera whenever certain subject matters come up, is that I've been using different examples to let my viewers know that, yes, I do know what I'm talking about. Yes, there was a certain particular person at a certain particular time that said a certain particular thing. So it's becoming more and more difficult for these silver talkers, these split tongue talkers, to be able to get up there and manipulate the people that they've been artists towards for the past 40 years in promising us one thing, but in actuality doing just the very opposite, or not doing nothing at all.
Even NBC's Gabe Gutierrez at the White House. So, Josh, what do we know about these reported strikes near hospitals in Gaza?
Well, we know, Jose, that we have now verified video from our colleagues at Reuters that shows the aftermath of a strike that damaged the outpatient clinic at Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza.
You know, whenever you get to looking at that problem over there with the war, who would have thought that the enemy would have been smart enough to have dug tunnels all in the ground where you can't track them from a satellite, and kept it quiet? Because it took years to do this, to dig out and hone out these headquarters, and they're putting them up underneath schools and hospitals in strategic areas, to where Jerusalem, if they attack towards actually blowing up that particular entity, there's no way that they can do it other than taking out collateral damage, human casualties. And I'm telling you right now, the enemy has become twice as strong, twice as smart, twice as gung-ho as what we ever thought that the enemy was. And 9/11, and of course the attack on Jerusalem, is a good example of that. And these are all events that has happened just recently in our lifetime that we can really put our finger to and say, wow, that's really happening, isn't it? Yes, that's really going on. It's almost like we got a bunch of people asleep. And to me, it shows our arrogance in underestimating our enemy, in knowing just exactly who and what and why the adversary is doing what they're doing. And I still say that it's based around trying to bring self-destruction to humanity. That way we basically destroy ourselves in a very, very slow, agonizing way.
We know that both Palestinian officials and the WHO say that there were strikes at that and other hospitals today. What we don't yet know is whether this was specifically targeted by the IDF, or whether these in fact were Israeli strikes, because the Israeli military, as you point out, has not yet commented on this. We do know that Israel has been very open about the fact that their military is operating in the vicinity of hospitals in the Gaza Strip. They say that is because there are terror targets that are in that vicinity.
That is such of a humanitarian crisis right now that I don't even think Red Cross and all of our charitable nonprofit organizations, not only here in America but throughout the world, could actually get a handle on all this that's going on because of the severity of everything that's happening. Now, I did hear where I think they have agreed to a 4-hour ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, to be able to go in and try to manage things a little bit better. But you got the people over on that bank, they got their own leadership to blame for this. Not Jerusalem, not Israel, not the Jews, but the other party. They got them to blame for all this.
But whether or not they're intentionally targeting hospitals remains to be seen. And one of the reasons that this has become so obscure, Jose, is because we have now moved into the phase of this conflict where it's not just airstrikes from the sky, where it's fairly obvious from video from the ground in the aftermath if a bomb was dropped from an airplane. We're talking now about shelling from tanks within the Gaza Strip. We're talking about close quarters combat. And so it's very difficult sometimes to tell tell from these videos quickly exactly what has happened. And you also have tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians who have sought shelter in the vicinity of these hospitals, in the courtyards of these hospitals. And so when there is damage, when there is injuries, it can be very difficult to know if the hospital itself was hit or possibly the areas around them, still leading to significant numbers of casualties. But as of now, the Israeli military not yet commenting on what we've seen today at Al-Shifa Hospital.
I can only imagine what our spy networks are doing right now all over the global society. Not just in America, but all over the global society. In seeing so much dust and smoke and chaos that it's basically next to impossible to keep up with everything that's going on because there's so much of it going on. It's just turned into nothing but a cluster of unreasonableness that if we don't watch, it could very well escalate into a regional war that could actually escalate into a third world war occurrence. And that's the frightening thing about it, is because you know good and well that Iran, they're lying, manipulating ways that hates Israel over there, Jerusalem. If the truth be known, pertaining to their conductors, they probably already got nuclear bombs. They probably do. They're semiconductors that basically help to build a nuclear bomb, and to think that we're this close, that even young Bush talked about the mushroom clouds occurring. We are this close of seeing that materialize itself in that form. And I think that even young Bush knowed that, especially after 9/11, was the reason why that they was so consistent in talking that way about the mushroom bombs, the mushroom cloud bombs, that they knowed, because of it basically getting out of hand the way that it has, that it could actually cause a nuclear battle that could lead into a nuclear holocaust worldwide. That's how close we are. I don't know if anybody understands that or can comprehend that or even cares about that. But I'm just telling you that this thing could start out as just a little bitty match and then turn into a Roman candle, and the next thing you know, half the world is burning up or dying because of nuclear fallout or whatever. We are that close of seeing this occur. How frightening and how scary is that? I don't have words to express my feelings right now about how that the Windmill Ministries missions have tried and tried and tried in preventing something like this occurring. And that wasn't my primary purpose. For God anointed me pertaining to the opening of the first seal, pertaining to the two witnesses, the four horsemen, the seven seals, the one world order, the new world order. That wasn't my primary purpose for any and all of this. My primary purpose was to be obedient to God and to put out the message to the world that we are living in end times, in perilous times. But the more that I keep seeing it escalating, projecting in the way that it's going, the more I keep thinking to myself, wow, this goes beyond careless. This goes beyond reckless. I tend to wonder if it's not being done intentionally, knowing the direction that we're going is going to be the doom to us all.
Hospital, Jose.
And so, Josh, what are officials in Israel saying about these pauses in operations?
Well, they're really downplaying the significance of what the White House announced yesterday, Jose. They say, look, we for days now have been allowing these humanitarian corridors out of northern Gaza, frankly, because they want civilians to leave so that what is left in northern Gaza is Hamas terrorists that they can then target. They say there is no period of time where Israel has agreed to a ceasefire or even to stop strikes on the entirety of the Gaza Strip. They say for certain localized areas, various neighborhoods, they are announcing these pauses so that aid can get in, people can take time to get the supplies that they need and to get out of the Gaza Strip. But they are really insisting that what Israel has agreed to looks nothing like the kind of ceasefire that much of the international community is now calling for.
Gabe, what is the White House saying about these pauses?
Jose, well, White House official is clarifying that this was a formalization and an expansion of what the IDF had been doing for days. As Josh mentioned, Israeli officials are downplaying this, but the White House says that there are several things about this that are new, including a new humanitarian corridor from one corridor to two that would accomplish several things. One, potentially to get civilians out of harm's way, to also get humanitarian aid into the region, and if and when hostage releases are negotiated, it would allow that to happen as well. Now, a senior administration official also clarified to me that when the President Biden was asked whether he had been asking for a 3-day humanitarian pause, the president responded that he'd been asking for a pause potentially much longer than that. And a senior administration official confirmed to me just a short time ago that yes, the president at one point had asked for a longer pause, but wouldn't go into any details, any further details about private discussions between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And interesting, Gabe, the fact that these pauses were announced by the White House, essentially the National Security Advisor, announcing that they're at the White House and not in Israel.
Yeah, that's right, Jose. And look, the Biden administration has for days now been trying to signal that it is asking for those humanitarian pauses, perhaps as a reaction to, international outcry about what's happening with civilians in Gaza. But the U.S. has been very clear repeatedly that it does not want to seem as telling Israel what to do, that it's, up to Israel to decide what military tactics it would do in Israel. So certainly, as Josh was mentioning, Israeli officials downplaying this, but the announcement of these pauses did come from the National Security Council here in the U.S.
And Gabe, we're also learning this morning that President Biden will meet with China's Xi Jinping in San Francisco next week.
Yeah, that's right. The White House announcing this morning, making it official that President Biden would meet with Chinese President Xi in the Bay Area next Wednesday. Now, this will be the first time that President Biden is face-to-face with the Chinese president in about a year. The last time he did so was at the G20 summit in Indonesia, and it will be the first time that President Xi actually comes to the United States in about 6 years, when he met with former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Now, the White House says that there will be a range of regional and global issues that will be brought up. Certainly, something expected to be talked about is the production of...
Let's go on. Let's move on. Move on. It's all sickening. It's out of control. Water bash moment. There has to be some sort of reasoning in what's going on, due to the fact that we're no longer dealing with just common warfare. There has to be some sort of reasoning in all this, because if not, it could very well be the doom to us all. And I know whenever I say stuff like that, people's going to say, man, isn't his...
It's your vision. It's your horizon.
Isn't his imagination running wild? No, it's really not.
A senior Israeli security official tells NBC News that a strike at Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza today resulted from a projectile launched by a militant group inside Gaza that misfired. NBC News has not independently confirmed that. The Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry says there have been multiple casualties at that hospital. Gaza officials accused Israel...
And I want to cut in on this. With those people's with those people's materials being so ancient and primitive, there'll be almost as many accidents by them basically blowing themselves up or hurting themselves on both sides, as it will be towards them attacking the actual enemy. You know, I went down the line of things going on in American affairs pertaining to our military, and it's something like 15 to 17% of all injuries that happens in battle, in combat, is primarily because of it backfiring on our own people, or where you have somebody discharging a firearm, or not a firearm, but a missile, and having it hit their own people, collateral damage. So this has turned into a cluster of uncertainty that God only knows the trajectory that they're on right now, where it's going to be, where it's actually going to be at in another month from now, because they're on a trajectory right now of catastrophics on every imaginable level you can think of.
Launching airstrikes overnight near hospitals. Earlier this hour, I asked a spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces about these blasts. He neither confirmed nor denied them. Joining us now is Toby Fricker, Chief of Communications and Partnerships at UNICEF. Toby, thank you for being with us this morning. What's your team in Gaza seeing right now?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, the team in Gaza is seeing a catastrophic situation unfolding day by day, hour by hour, second by second. Children who continue to be killed, and we've had reports now of around 4,500 children who've been killed, many thousands injured. And the situation is not getting any better, let's say. It's really absolutely horrific for every family. And what we're really calling for now is, and we have been, is this immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And at the same time for UNICEF, other partners to be able to bring in that life-saving aid at scale. We know that the medical facilities, child healthcare services are at breaking point, particularly across the parts of the northern area of the Gaza Strip. And that's why it's so critical that, first of all, they're protected, but also that we can get medical supplies, medical equipment in. You have children, in intensive care, children being treated for injuries, but also children with everyday health conditions on dialysis, for example. So it really needs...
not only that, but it creates a whole different environment over there pertaining to diseases and hardships falling upon to both sides. And if the truth be known, the people in general on both sides don't want this. This has basically got to do with who's in charge and who's the king of the mountain over there. And that's the way it's been now for years and years and years. I mean, it was something like 70 different terrorist groups, and this was back in 2000. God only knows how many terrorist groups are over there now. And you're just dealing with a Wild Wild West type contamination through and through, back and forth, as far as the sea is wide as it is long over there. And if we don't watch, this could be the very spark that turns into a Roman candle. Then the Roman candle turns into a blazing, whatever you want to call it. We could actually see this develop in the 21st century to where people all over the world will see unimaginable horrors such as they could have never ever imagined of seeing on TV. And it's already reached that level actually in the horrors, but it could actually get worse. Some people might say, well, it can't get no worse. It can't get no worse. Oh, yeah, it can. It can get worse. Pertaining to the diseases, pertaining to the mishaps, pertaining to nuclear engagement. Oh, yeah, it could get a lot worse.
Really needs to stop now, let's say, and we need to really have that humanitarian ceasefire. We need to see the civilians, the children abducted, released, and we need to scale up that life-saving aid.
And so the Israelis have been pretty clear that a ceasefire is not going to be happening anytime soon. And if you look at just, the history of warfare in general, ceasefires come at a very specific time after a lot of things have been accomplished. And unfortunately, a lot of deaths have also occurred. Barring a ceasefire, there are these now apparently 6-hour moments of a pause. Do you think that in any way is helpful?
Well, the UN, as we've said, and the UN has said that those pauses need to be very closely coordinated with the UN. It needs to be very specific in terms of the timing and the locations. But what I can say is that those pauses are just not, given the immense needs, are just not long enough. That's why we keep calling for this humanitarian ceasefire, given the huge needs that are on the ground. But we are doing what we can. We have our staff inside the Gaza Strip. They're working around the clock to try and do what they can to alleviate at least some of the suffering by getting supplies, getting life-saving aid into the shelters where people have been displaced to. But many of them are also displaced. They've lost family members as well. So it's incredibly difficult and complicated and challenging to move around at the moment, obviously, in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and I mean, just after the 7th of October massacre in Israel and the war that was declared after that, for more than a week and a half, there was nothing going in as far as any humanitarian supplies into Gaza. That started now as a trickle, and apparently now maybe 100 trucks or so a day. How do you, Toby, guarantee that aid actually gets to the people that most need it?
Yeah, I mean, at UNICEF and the UN, we have robust sort of systems in place, monitoring systems, and what we try and do as soon as that aid can come in is to move it quickly, get it to the shelters where civilians need it the most. We have very densely populated areas where people have been displaced to, and they're living in incredibly difficult situations. We're very concerned about the outbreak, for example, of waterborne diseases. The access to safe water is extremely limited. The sanitation conditions are very, very poor. And that's why it's so important that we can at least improve those conditions and stop potential threats of this risk of diseases from outbreak. And we're already seeing increased dehydration, diarrhea cases rising very rapidly.
Cesspool, turning into a cesspool. And God only knows what else that we're going to see that's going to develop out of this. We could actually see primitive third world country diseases. And as I've said before, every time that an event like this happens, it strains the resources on everybody else. So if you don't think that this is going to have an effect on individual people all over the world pertaining to the price of things, you better think again. You better think again. Because I guarantee you it will affect supply chain issues. It will affect the prices in economies all over the world. It could affect availability with medications here, not only in the United States, but in other places that we're already seeing a shortage on things right here in the United States. It could affect from A to Z, from being able to go to the Holy Land with a church group to people actually losing their homes and their automobiles and their lives right here in the States. So don't think that this could be the leading to the actual apocalypse, the War of Armageddon.
Yeah, Toby Frigger, I really appreciate you being on with us. I thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.
Up next, new comments from former President Donald Trump.
I get so frustrated in watching Donald Trump, that as far as I'm concerned, he's just taking up air and space now. I mean, a lot of his methods was just way off beat. His ideology may have been right. His ideology may have been right pertaining to draining the swamp over here in America, but the way that he went about doing it was absolutely wrong.
more open tension between the U.S. embrace of Israel's right to defend itself, but still the way the war is being prosecuted, some of the bunker buster bombs, some of the dumb munitions initially in Gaza, and now the hospitals being encircled.
Right.
Where do you come down on this? How does U.S. intelligence help find the hostages?
Yes.
We're not on the ground.
Well, you're right. I hope that U.S. intelligence is helping the Israelis, and if it's
turned into a hot zone. And don't think that it won't spread, because it will spread just like cancer. Keep in mind, started out in the 90s. Jerry Springer. People laughing, giggling, being entertained by other people's sorrows. People getting basically their jollies off towards watching other people, their lives being destroyed. Then it went from that to what happened in Waco, Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas. Then it went from that to what happened in Oklahoma. Then it went from that to other events of other attacks that we've had. Then it went from that to 9/11, and there's been lots of stuff that's happened in between. We had COVID. We had the petroleum fuel companies jabbing everybody. We had Russia and Ukraine, and now we've got this. And God only knows what's going on right now in places like South America, Mexico, Africa, Indonesia, wherever. Even the Philippines is having trouble right now. This is not a good scene on any and every level, especially in the 21st century, that we no longer just have rocks to chunk at one another, but now we have very, very lethal weapons that can bring destruction to humanity.
Position that the command and control of Hamas is underneath the Al-Shifa hospital, I hope will say so and help clear up some of this debate around the world.
I've been told we can't confirm that independently.
Can't confirm it
There
independently.
are elements of Hamas in those tunnels, but they can't confirm the precise description that Israel has been giving from the beginning.
So whatever they have, I hope they'll come out with it. I am trying to be sympathetic to the Israelis because of the situation they're in, and I want them to be able to prosecute the war to the fullest. But I think what they can do, and you alluded to this on the bunker buster bombs, if there's a way to achieve mission success while lessening the humanitarian consequences, they ought to go do it. We saw in the New York Times on Sunday, we wanted to use smaller diameter bombs. That makes more sense, more precision weaponry. Also, I know Netanyahu is trying when he tries to go forward with these humanitarian pauses, but it's in his self-interest over time if the international community lessens its pressure or recognizes Israel doing more for humanitarian causes. I think they'll give him more time to prosecute the war, which is what he needs. He's going to need a lot more than the 34 days that Israel had to prosecute a war against Hezbollah in 2006.
And Ambassador Pincus, help us here, because Israel is not yielding to what the U.S. says is a bottom line. Blinken repeated it today.
And keep in mind, not just of the sophistication of things going on today that wasn't even possible 10 years ago, but people's been stockpiling for all this. In every one of them little areas where they claim that they've been wanting peace, they ain't been wanting peace. They've been building. They've been stockpiling. They've been waiting for this moment to occur. This is a disaster just waiting to occur. And I'm talking about something on levels a whole lot worse than now. A whole lot worse.
That there needs to be a Palestinian governance, Palestinian rights, and a two-state solution. That is an article of faith with this administration. And Netanyahu's expansion of settlements arguably has not yielded to that. And there were members of his coalition who were telling us, we don't believe in Palestinian governance, and that they certainly have not shown the ability to lead themselves, but they've been undermined by Israeli positions over the last number of years, since 2014.
Well, you're exactly right, Andrea. But you have to assume that whatever plans the U.S. has for the day after in Gaza, and by extension the West Bank, and by extension a so-called, it's not a popular term these days, but it will become again a peace process, will involve a different Israeli government. You just alluded to the composition of Mr. Netanyahu's coalition and the fact that he's heading this government, and that won't work. Whether this is an intermittent ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities, a humanitarian pause, we can all...
1.6 million people have been displaced is what they're saying right there. I'm pretty sure that's probably a conservative number. You keep in mind that it was over 10 million people that got displaced over in Ukraine whenever Russia done what they done. Where did all them people spread out to? They spread out to Poland. They spread out to other areas. That's even squeezed the resources that much more on the people that took those people in. Every time an event occurs like this, regardless whether it comes from the forces of nature or the forces of mankind, which as far as I'm concerned is a derivative of the same evil entity, which is the Antichrist, Lucifer. Every time this occurs, it diminishes the resources to the degree that everything is based around supply and demand, and the more demand and the less supply, the higher people's going to take advantage of other people that's misfortunate, that don't have proper means to be able to afford stuff like this. This is a whole... I mean, if you can't see that they're on a trajectory right now that could turn the world totally upside down. People don't understand what's happening on a global scale.
The terminology, but it won't work. Now, Mike Allen correctly said that it's going to take more time to pursue or to prosecute the war's objectives. Yes, but the question is how much more time? And I would assess conservatively no more than 2-3 weeks. And then there could be a period of time, again, 2-3 weeks, no more, of what low intensity conflict, search and destroy operations, but not an ongoing permanent Israeli presence, military presence in the Gaza Strip. And so whatever ideas the U.S. has on who will govern Gaza, what will be the day after, has to be based on two fundamental assumptions: that Hamas is destroyed, at least politically, militarily is a given, but at least politically, and that there is a different Israeli government.
And very, very briefly, Mike Allen, what are the chances of getting those hostages out?
I think they're very low. I noticed Barbara Leaf of the State Department said recently that she doesn't have a lot of trust in Qatar's ability to persuade Hamas to do this. So I put it at very low, frankly.
Mike Allen, Ambassador Alon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that hostage crisis, the high-level talks continuing in several countries trying to rescue more than 200 people who were taken by Hamas terrorists more than a month ago. We'll talk to the boyfriend.
40-something years ago, whenever Reagan traded hostages for guns, and even during the Carter era, we knew then that the Middle East was going to be a hotbed for problems. That's the reason why the CIA has been impenetrated into those areas over there so deeply. So, my God, how in the world could this have slipped through the eyes and the ears of not just their internal affairs, but ours too as well? Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
More than a month now since the October 7th attacks when they were taken. Among them is 27-year-old Inbar Hayman, who was volunteering at the Nova Music Festival when Hamas fighters stormed through. She tried to escape and hide with others, but was captured in video posted by Hamas the next day. Inbar appears bloody and unconscious. And joining me now is Inbar's boyfriend, Noam Alan. Noam, it's incomprehensible what you and family members are going through. Have you heard any news at all about Inbar since that video was posted?
We didn't have any new information, but according to the Israeli military and authorities, she considered to be as kidnapped. So we didn't have any new information, but we are guessing and believing and praying that Hamas kept her and all the other hostages alive and safe. This is their goal, to use them as leverages to make an exchange deal, and this is what we are wishing for and expecting from our government to do.
Tell us what happened to her that day from the best you know.
From what that we are knowing, she was escaping from the music festival with her friends. In some point they split, and she ran with two Israeli guys, Rom and Piel. They tried to escape. They were hiding in the bushes for hours, and in some point she wasn't able to run anymore.
Now you see what's going on right there, which basically we automatically put this in our minds towards it being a wartime scenario. Now put it into your minds pertaining to children running at schools here in America. Our people running because of concerts over in Las Vegas. Our people being massacred in other types of public venues that we see occurring over here in America. The setting may be different, but the interior motives of what's driving this is the same. Evil. Evil is what is driving this. Regardless whether it be in a Las Vegas concert or in a festival over there in the Middle East, it's still the same. You can paint it up whatever color you want. You can shake it up in a can and drop them out, and they're all going to come out the same. They're all going to come out the same. And if we don't have good, sound, professional, reasonable people that can look through the smoke screen and see these things, then basically we have set a sail for our own Achilles heel, our own demise on the planet. That's a scary freaking thought, man. That's a scary freaking thought.
She froze, and the terrorists took her on a motorbike, two terrorists, without that she got any hurt. And we know later there was a video posted on Telegram, and she saw the taken by 4 terrorists to Gaza. We cannot know from the video about her condition, but we do believe and knowing that she's a...
Barbarians. Barbarians is nothing more than barbarian evil activity, regardless whether it be in the Middle East or it be in a Las Vegas concert where somebody kicks the window out and starts spraying everybody down below.
Nice.
My message to Hamas and for the Israeli government and for everybody that hear me, that Inbar and all the other citizens there...
You know, mankind is actually worse than a lion, a tiger, a bear, or any other animal, because 99.9% of the time, that animal will be scared of a human than it will be of a human that's scared against that animal. But you threaten that animal, and you threaten to corner that animal, or start messing around with that animal's family, and then that animal will show you how wicked and how cruel that they really are. They got a reason. The humans don't have to have a reason. They just do it for basically entertainment. kind of the way that the Romans done to Christians by throwing them into the Colosseums and watching the lions chew them up and eat them. Evil. Barbarians. Started out with Jerry Springer. In the 90s, in the early 90s. And now look what it's led to.
And around the world, diplomats, celebrities, and everyday people have been calling for the hostages to be released to their loved ones. This week, some of Broadway's greatest entertainers released their rendition of a profoundly moving song from Les Mis, Bring Them Home, a Broadway prayer. Sometimes music can do what protests cannot.
If God had granted me a smile, the sky, one by one, how soon they fall, and they are old, and they are young. Fashion moves fast. So we partnered with Verizon to take...
I don't know where that song come from, but it had a lot of deep meaning to it, didn't it?
It's important.
A lot of deep meaning. A lot of deep meaning.
But no, and I can't know exactly what it was unless I watch it.
The Hollywood Reporter, which was inside the screening, reports that the protests were audible through the wall of the theater, prompting an Israel Defense Forces spokesperson who introduced the film to tell the audience they believe some are trying to cast doubt on the Hamas attacks, saying, quote, "I believe we are hearing some of it right now outside." The LAPD said the event concluded with no issues, but that 1 hour later, a small group of demonstrators returned, leading to the brawl. Violence outside that attendees say won't overshadow the atrocities they saw inside on screen.
I will carry it with me to pass that story on to the next generation and the next generation.
Stephanie Elam, CNN, Los Angeles.
We'll be right back with much more after this short break.
What did the Lord Jesus say in the last days? That there would be uprisings, commotions, wars, rumors of wars, all kinds of problems, the world running to and fro and from, back and forth, not knowing which way it was going, either towards peace or war. I mean, it's just a constant cluster of
people like that
catastrophes.
who really want to get stuff done are finding it harder and harder. So let me get your take on where the parties are now, especially with the presidential candidates. It's Donald Trump's party when it comes to Republicans. It seems so far, at least, to be Joe Biden's party when it comes to Democrats, the establishment.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Unbelievable.
Statement.
Fashion moves.
Unbelievable in a sad way, not in a good way.
For them, it's like trial doesn't even exist.
Right.
And that's unrealistic.
Right. And also, it's important to note out that some of the people who involved in the pro-life movement made a note this week. The left likes to say, oh, it's not abortion on demand. But even in Michigan this week, they did a partial birth abortion and they were allowed to pass something forward. So they try to cover it up under the guise of health care, but we know exactly.
He said, I wanted a longer one. And then they said, will there be a ceasefire? And he said, I don't think so. You know, would there be a longer ceasefire? I've seen on all across social media people taking that little tiny clip where Joe Biden said, "Will where they said, will there be a ceasefire?" And he said, "No, I don't think so," or words to that effect, and put it out as if that was him saying that he doesn't want a ceasefire. And he's being ripped apart on social media for that because they took it completely out of context.
The media mischaracterizes stuff all the time.
Little visit or ongoing
taking nitbits of somebody that says something.
How about that?
And twisting it and turning it around to the degree that they try to make it into
prices
something.
To fit your...
They try to make it into something that it's not.
Yeah, and it also got tied up in a controversy during the Trump administration because, of course, that headquarters where FBI is now, right on Pennsylvania Avenue across from the Justice Department, is pretty prime real estate. And there were concerns about whether Donald Trump was worried that perhaps a rival hotel right down the street, a block away from his.
It's depressing.
Its relentless attacks on Gaza has shown that it plans to keep that promise. But there is a problem in that strategy. The leaders of Hamas, not all of them at least, are in Gaza.
Are not in Gaza. And the men who call the shots for Hamas are mostly located far away, living, it said.
You see what I'm talking about? The different signals? All these different signals coming from all these different news agencies. One says it's going to be a ceasefire. The other one says there's no way. One's taking things and mischaracterizing that somebody says something and trying to change it and manipulate it into something else. It's chaotic. And these are the things that Jesus told us to prepare for in the last days. That obviously certain individuals, beginning at the White House, did not want true agape, loving, Holy Ghost anointing peace. So this is where we are today. Good luck to each and every one of us. God bless America. God bless our troops, our American troops. And God bless our endeavors towards where we go from this moment on. Shalom.